George Washington University's president vowed to remove flyers criticizing the Communist Chinese government. You're watching Hot Take with Kate Herzl. After pressure from students, the president reversed his decision to remove the flyers. Here we have George Washington University student Ezra Meyer to tell us a little bit more about what's been happening on his campus.
So about a couple of weeks ago, posters criticizing the Chinese Communist Party for their subjugation of Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Hong Kongers emerged on the George Washington University campus. And an email from the university president to the Chinese Students and Scholars Association was leaked, saying he was personally offended by these posters. Once that email was publicized by the Leadership Institute's campus reform, the president walked back his comments, claiming he had been misinformed on the purpose of the posters, and he clearly stated his support of free speech. Throughout this time, and for a while before that, I, along with a number of other students and student groups, have been working to pressure the university to divest all of its endowment holdings from companies that enabled the CCP's genocide and persecution of the Uyghur people. And unfortunately, without the exposure of this initial email, we would never have known the extent of the uphill battle we face with this administration.
And yes, and as you said, Campus Reform has reported on this story, but this story was reported by many news outlets and made national news. What was the reaction of your fellow classmates on campus when they heard about this? That they heard that your president was more willing to restrict free speech on campus than criticize the Chinese government?
Yeah, it's not an ideal situation because universities are really supposed to be for of open and free exchanges of ideas and opinions. But at too many across the country now, we're seeing free speech and expression discouraged. The posters at George Washington University were originally put up by students passionate about the situation in China. But those students have had to have their anonymity protected. The posters have remained up since the university president's clarification, but one by one, many are being pulled down by so-called activists within the student body. There are even ongoing efforts, public efforts, within the GW Student Association to ban some of the posters, alleging that they're offensive and racist. This is often the same verbiage that Chinese state media has used to respond to this specific incident on my campus. We're seeing Chinese Communist Party talking points regurgitated in the discourse on campus and within our own student association. So as an American, this is not just horrifying to observe, but it's deeply troubling to think that my university, in the heart of Washington, D.C., and so many others like it across the country are potentially complicit in this genocide. And as a student, I don't necessarily have significant influence on the foreign policy of the United States, but I can at the very least work to have an impact in my own communities. We've organized protests and events as part of this campaign to make our voices heard and ensure that our own university detaches itself from any involvement it may have with the CCP's human rights abuses.
You just said that you're having a protest on campus. What has been the overall reaction at the university?
So overall, the reception has been largely positive. One of the things that we're very proud of is this has been a bipartisan effort, which I think is incredibly important with an issue like this to have a unified front from the American people. There is some opposition that we face from groups like the Chinese Student and Scholars Association and various activists and student senators, but overall, it seems to be having overwhelming bipartisan support, and hopefully we'll get some traction with the administration here in terms of achieving real change. To me, it's incredibly concerning that not only has this issue of Uyghur persecution been ignored by the West for far too long, but that there are American voices trying to excuse it or give it a safe haven under the guise of simply opposing racism, now that it's been brought more to the light. And the freedoms that groups are being deprived of in China are freedoms we must support universally. We must oppose regimes that deny these freedoms to people, and we must certainly condemn any complicit behavior that occurs here in the United States and pervades through the academia that is supposed to train the leaders of tomorrow. So we sincerely hope that our university will carefully examine its endowment to divest from all holdings complicit with the immoral actions of the CCP. And we'll continue our campaign of educating the student body and pressuring the university. And hopefully we can become an example for universities across the country to follow suit and divest as well.
Thank you so much for coming on, Ezra. We really appreciate you fighting for free speech. And that was Hot Take with Kate Herzl.